Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 46 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith, and I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Steph Sherrodd. Steph is the president and CEO of TDECU in Houston, Texas. Steph is actively involved in the credit union system, both nationally and back home, and we talk quite a bit about that. In this episode, we have a wide-ranging conversation about leadership, vision, and developing people, and how specifically leadership development plans tie into the long-term vision of the credit union. This was a ton of fun. Steph doesn't do a lot of these type of things, but I'm so glad that she agreed to be on the podcast. I think you will be too. I had quite a few kind of aha moments during the conversation. I wish I personally had the chance to talk to Steph earlier in my, let's say, leadership journey. So a really good one that I think you're going to enjoy. You'll find out in this episode some of the nuggets that have helped her credit union not only survive, but thrive in this fast-paced, ever-changing world that is today's financial services, and a whole lot more. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Steph Sherrodd. Enjoy. Steph, welcome to the show. I was so excited to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
It was interesting running around credit unions like I do at all the conferences. I've been asking people all year, like, who should I get on the show? And your name kept coming up. And I was talking to Denise over at TDECU, and she was like, you need to talk to Steph. So I'm really excited. So thank you again for doing this.
Appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So something I noticed when I was doing the research on the old interwebs about you, it was, leading up to this conversation was the words vision and development, kept coming up. And I'd like to start with development. It looks to me from, like I said, the research that you've made a career of, around development, your background at CUIs, you're on the board there. And then also the idea of mapping career development for team members and things like that. Is that something that was a part of the culture at the credit union, or is that something that became it's just always been important to you and that you kind of brought to the table?
Well, certainly both. I mean, I've been the recipient of great development over the years, having worked for leaders that believed in development and invested in me in order to get me ready for, this job and to continue, as a credit union leader. And knowing that, though, has helped me make sure that we prioritize that as an organization. And then it changes over time, too, right? As the credit union grows, the kind of development that we need for our team, it's different. We're facing different challenges than we did, 10 years ago. We're in a different environment, in a different economy. And so making sure that we're adapting our development as an organization has been very important to us. And so a lot of the talent discussions we have are about how to get the right talent in place in the right roles and then continue to develop them so that, our teams continue to evolve as the credit union evolves.
A couple of things you said there are so interesting. The pace of change in financial services is so fast, and maybe the world in general, right? And then you've had awesome growth as well. So the organization has to look quite a bit different just by adding people, right? So we hear about the war for talent a lot, and it's a topic that comes up a ton on the podcast. Have these programs not only helped you retain your good folks, but also attract, those qualified candidates? And you're down in Texas. That's a tight job market, right? So have you seen these programs and that focus on development help you with with your employee base?
Well, certainly, when employees see other employees become the recipient of development and then they get promoted, they get new jobs, they get to work in exciting new projects, that certainly helps other people see that, hey, the credit union is willing to invest in development. And two, there are great benefits if I do this, right? In the end, the employee is the one that's making the commitment as well, right? They're saying, I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping my skills up, that I'm going to invest a part of my time And sometimes that's outside of work, right? Maybe they go back to school or attend conferences, those types of things that can look different in different ways. They're making that investment as well. They want to see that there's benefit for that. So the more that we're able to develop and grow talent internally, the more excited other employees become around that and want to invest in themselves as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's something I found personally, and I'd almost say it was a struggle, is in the past when I've talked to employees, that they always want the development, but then sometimes getting them to know what's available. I think that's got to be part of the program, right? Is to not only motivate them, and maybe as they see others do it. That's something we've talked a lot about at CUInsight recently, was making sure that everybody's keeping pace with that pace of change, right? Like, so it's
yeah, especially for leaders, people that are leading other people. We make sure they have a learning and growth plan that isn't only attending, conferences or school. It's also, perhaps special projects or stretch assignments or other parts of that development cycle that sometimes get overlooked for instead just, attending a training class. It's just one piece of development versus really an overall learning and growth plan.
That's interesting to me. Does that tie into the other word that I mentioned in the beginning was vision? When you're talking about the leadership, like the development of your leadership team, does that align with the vision that you have for your credit union?
Oh, absolutely. It's all tied back to our strategy, where we're going, what we want to accomplish. I'm really fortunate to have a terrific chief people officer who has, really built out this program for us here at TDECU and making sure that those pieces are tied closely together so that we're getting the results we want and continue to evolve in that way.
Recently on the show, we've had like Molly Bell and Tansley Stern, who are in that kind of role, but also how they've talked about people and strategy and even the marketing side of the credit union all going together. So it's a cool thing. One of the things that I noticed, and I'm going to throw this out there, I don't know when you sleep. You seem to volunteer for a lot of different boards, whether it's in the the credit union industry, but also locally in the community. A question that I like to ask, because I've heard it said over and over that some people have struggled with the idea that, getting involved nationally, maybe the board or maybe, people back at the credit union are like, well, how does that benefit the credit union? As somebody who has been on many boards in our industry, how does your credit union benefit from your involvement nationally?
Well, it gives me an opportunity to see what's going on outside our walls. I mean, that's one thing, right? Where I get exposed to other parts of the industry, best practices, perhaps new technologies, new ideas, new perspectives that are helpful and bring those back to the organization, and just being around other top leaders across the country, I find, kind of helps keep my own mind sharp and, brings back perspective and new ideas. And I find it energizing. So there's certainly that, on more the local scale, it's, helping our credit union increase its brand awareness, in a crowded marketplace, big markets that we are in. It's really, how do we help the TDECU name become better well-known and introduce it to people who might not hear about us otherwise.
Yeah. And I mean, that sense of community, it seemed like was a few different guests have talked about that being the credit union kind of almost superpower, right? Like that we are part of the communities and the way we give back. Yeah, I noticed that a ton in there. Something I was thinking about when you were talking about that networking with other leaders, multiple times again on the show, CEOs have mentioned it can be lonely at the CEO position, right? Like, so to have that like pack of people that you can lean on and who are going through the similar struggles or, sharing those joys, right? So that's something we keep hearing coming up over and over again. The one place that I did want to switch to before we get into the leadership portion of the show was you've really had remarkable growth at TDECU since you've taken over. The asset size has grown. Do you have any hacks that when you're looking, I guess at the long-term vision and growth of the organization, but also having those short-term measurable, maybe check-in points or short-term wins, I guess, along the way to keep on that path?
Yeah, I think the learnings that I've had have been around focus. For one, we always want to do a lot of great things, and I think, like any leader, I have a long list of ideas and things that we'd like to do, but making sure that we keep the organization focused on the few that deliver the most value is an area that I know I've really worked on. Also, just keeping it simple for our employees, for our members, how we communicate, how we put things together. We can make it complex.
Right.
Doesn't need to be. Doesn't need to be. So really, keeping it simple. I would say those would be the big things that I've really worked on as a leader, and that we've really worked on here at TDECU.
You mentioned there's so many things to do. Is that something you do through strategic planning, where you kind of go, okay, here's 100 things we want to do, but here's the 2 we need to do.
Yeah, really through planning and through focus, and also having a team that will speak the truth to say, hey, that's a shiny thing. That's not really, that sounds fun and cool, but we need to really make sure that we're executing on these things that are going to deliver the most value for our members and deliver the most growth for the organization. So, keeping it real in the room and having those tough conversations about how to make sure that we're doing those 2 things, focus and keep it simple.
And keeping it simple. We mentioned the growth that you've had, and you're running a large credit union. Just in the time CUInsight's been around, we've seen the number of credit unions cut in half. The question that I like to ask, especially when I have somebody on the podcast who has, bucked the trend, let's just say, you've grown the credit union quite a bit. Is there something fundamentally that you think credit unions need to change to stay relevant going forward?
I think that, obviously what we're seeing is consolidation because scale matters. I think that focus matters, that finding our niche in the marketplace and, really working at being very, very good at that niche. Sometimes we can try to be all things, and that's not a good strategy for any business. So really finding that niche, and then, finding a compelling way to tell our story. I think that, from a marketing perspective, I know it's something that we work on here in terms of just continuing evolve our marketing and branding and telling the story in a way that is compelling. So many credit unions do such amazing things for their members, and perhaps people don't get to hear about it as well as they could. So, getting that message out there.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I always say we don't do the best job of telling all the great we do, right? So
yeah, exactly.
We're so modest. I want to move on to the second part of the show. It's all about leadership and life hacks. Again, when doing the research, it seems like you've had credit unions in the blood for quite some time. If I remember correctly, you had an internship at a credit union while in college. So what inspired you as your career went on to take the gig as president and CEO of TDECU?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've been fortunate to have a lot of great development, and a lot of people believed in me to get me to this point. Certainly didn't do it by myself, both professionally or personally, I would add. I have a great support network at home. And when I think about what we're really here to accomplish is really what continues to motivate me, which is helping our members sleep better at night. Finances, that's one of the toughest topics in any household and any person's life. And to have the ability to impact that, even in just a small way, is really a driver for me.
Oh, I love that line, actually. I mean, I'm somebody who likes to break stuff down to almost that simplest level, and just the idea of helping them sleep better at night. It's a beautiful a goal to have, right, with our members or really anybody. So has the inspiration changed at all becoming the CEO with the time on the job now?
I don't think so. I've been very much compelled by that type of background, my own personal experiences, and that hasn't really changed for me. Certainly, I would say it's just 7 years. So 1st of October was 7 years as a CEO. I've been here at TDECU for 15. certainly, I've changed, and a lot's changed. I've changed. Things are different. Perspective is different in that time, but the driver for me to do this hasn't changed. I would say I would add to it though is that I do feel really responsible for the lives and careers of the employees now. Maybe I didn't have that before I was CEO. That I know there's 800 people out here that are their families counting on the TDECU to continue their career journey as well. So that's definitely perspective that gets added.
I've told the story on the podcast before that when we hired our first employee at CUInsight, I felt my job changed. It was like, now it's to make sure her kids had mac and cheese on their plate and everything, right? So no longer it was about news anymore. So you mentioned change, and that kind of leads into the next question that I had for you. How would you describe your leadership style, and how has that style changed over time?
Yeah, it certainly has changed, I would say, in terms of how I go about building a team, how I go about, working with that team. We have a great group of leaders here at TDECU who, keep me honest and, have a lot of great conversations about the strategy and discussion. So I would say, it really takes great leaders are surrounded by a village of great leaders. And so, I would say, really building out that team. I've built my team much differently today than the team that was in place when I became CEO, and making sure that, as we bring people in, that, we have an environment that builds trust, that's inclusive, that everyone has a voice, and yet we stay true to the strategy and, continue to focus the organization, and that they also build great teams and great leaders and build that throughout the organization. I would say that we're much more focused on change management today, and the ability for our leaders to help the organization change, knowing that that's very much a part of where we are today and where we'll be in the future. You just see that continuously. I think you even mentioned it earlier. So, as we're bringing people in to the organization, and as we're developing, we're talking a lot more about how do we change effectively? How do we lead that and build that more is just part of how we do things versus, an add-on and something that only comes about once in a while.
I'm going to make an assumption, but has that changed the way that, like, let's just say more who you're looking for to add if we're talking specifically to your senior management team, that they have a background in change management, or is that all through development, like when you're adding new pieces to your puzzle?
Well, really both. When we talk to leaders, we want to know that they've been in organizations that have gone through changes, that they've been a part of that, they've experienced it. They have good practices and routines in place to know how to adapt and lead throughout change.
Thinking about your team right now, what's the greatest strength of your crew?
That they are enthusiastic and optimistic, and they have a lot of fun. So, after all of the work is done, we still have to enjoy it and enjoy each other, and take our work seriously, but not ourselves. And I think that we have a great group at that.
Is there something they've heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
There's a couple of things. They're not my sayings; they're quotes that I say a lot. One is, "What does great look like?" Cy Wakeman's terrific author. That's what she uses a lot, and it's really just to get us thinking about not out of the current state, but what does great really look like, right? What do we want that end state to be? And then my other quote that I say a lot, John Wooden, famous basketball coach, don't ever confuse activity with results. So we talk about that a lot. Results matter.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. When you think back to early in your career, another one of my favorite questions, was there a mistake that you made as a young leader, or one that now that you help develop leaders, is there a mistake that you just see young leaders make over and over again? Kind of we each have to take those hits, I guess. So.
Yeah, I would say I think often when we're wanting to make an impact, and I see this in developing leaders, I know for myself as well, is our first thought is just to get to work, right? And, sort of double down on productivity versus really taking a step back from a leadership view and saying, what do I need to do to get this work done? Do I need to build a team? Do I need to hire someone? Do I need support from another group? Thinking about it as an individual versus now let me think about this as a leader and how do I want to build this? I know that I've experienced that earlier in my career. It's something I still remind myself and something that I coach to often as well. When you hire people that are really achievement oriented, they always tend to work towards something first, and they don't always, but they often can do that. So just helping them remember, hey, this is about building, not necessarily doing.
I wish I would have talked to you a few years ago. I am by nature, I just put my head down and go. And that worked very well to start a company. It doesn't work well to build it as well. So it's just hey, I'm going to do this today. So it's something I've had to learn the hard way. I will say that. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received earlier in life that you find yourself going back to, or that you really hold on to?
Boy, so many. It's hard to think of one specifically, but I think that I had an early leader that used to say relationships don't happen in meetings. They're what happens outside the meetings that makes you more effective when you get to meetings. So making sure that, spending the time on developing relationships in order to be more effective, whether that be community, team, board, across the organization, outside, et cetera.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's for sure. When you run into a wall, or if you and your team are sitting in the boardroom and you're hitting your head up against a wall, is there something you do personally to take a different look at it, to clear the head?
I'd like to take a break and think about something else. So while I'm perfectly okay letting a problem like that lie, I've solved a lot of them on, a good run or, getting outside, getting some fresh air, thinking about things differently. So that's something that, I encourage our team to do as well is if you are at that point, you have to just take a break from it and, look at it through a different perspective. I get that through fresh air of many different types, but everybody is different.
Yep, that is true. Hey, as a leader of a fast-growing organization, you mentioned the message earlier. How do you make sure that your message, I go back and forth between saying stays fresh or maybe consistent, not only to your team at the credit union, but also to your community partners and your members over time?
Well, I think you said something very important there, which is consistent. That's what employees really want to hear is the message over time that shows consistency and to a strategy or to a certain direction, right? Where the temptation is to keep it fresh by making it sound different, but then it feels like, oh, we're just doing something different on an ongoing basis. So we've really worked on making sure that, our message builds on our strategy, that we stay really close to that. And as we communicate, we tie everything back to sort of our central purpose and what we're doing and who we are so that it doesn't feel like a flavor of the month or, something that is just passing by, that it gets that consistency.
That's a question that I keep in the podcast because it does seem like something it's consistency keeps coming up, but you still have to, make sure. I think it was John Spence when he was on the show talked about he's a leadership expert, and he talked about that just because we've all heard it 10, 20, 30 times doesn't mean the person down the organization or that community member has. So yeah, I am with you there as well. If you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what passions do you have outside of credit unions? What do you do to recharge? What does that work-life integration look like to you?
Yeah, so I'm a cyclist on the weekends. So I have a bike and a group of friends, and we ride pretty frequently. I'm also, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a runner. So I, do various fitness events just, for fun. I also still have one kid at home, one in college, one at home. So, I have weekend sports events, right? I do that too. I go to swim meets and water polo games and those things as well. But I do really enjoy the outdoors and being outside. I get a lot of energy from that, and so really try to build that into my life when I'm not at work.
Absolutely. Want to be respectful of your time and get to the last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. We get to have a little fun. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. Do you remember the first time you got into trouble? Like memorable trouble, at least that you can share with us.
I remember when I was a kid, my friend and I were walking, I don't know, somewhere, and there was wet concrete, and my friend jumped in the wet concrete. I think we really thought it was dry, and it wasn't. And the man who had been finishing this concrete totally busted us, took our parents' names and said he was going to call them. I don't think he did. But, today looking back, here's somebody who had to do all this work by hand, who had to redo it because these kids jumped in the concrete. But that's really probably the first time I can remember feeling really busted.
That's a great story. Do you have any daily routines that if you just don't do, your day feels off?
Well, coffee for sure. But I work out every day.
Okay.
So I have to do that to just, that's just part of my life and, a daily routine for me.
Is that something you do first thing in the morning or just find time to work it in or?
Yeah.
First thing?
5 a.m.
5 a.m.
Yeah.
The random question. What's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to from front to back.
Best album of all time. Boy, I like a lot of different music, but front to back, maybe Queen.
That's a good group to add to the playlist. Yeah, that's a good one to add.
I'd take that one.
I keep saying we're going to do a Spotify list at the end of the year with everybody's stuff, and it'll be a lot of fun. I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books in our house that have been recommended to us over time that we keep trying to make our way through. Is there a book that you've either gifted like over and over or that you just recommend you think everybody should read?
Yeah, my go-to that I go back to frequently is Man's Search for Meaning.
Viktor Frankl. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was the college I went to up in Michigan. Every semester there was a book the whole school read, and that happened to be one of them. And I've told more people about that book and went back to it. I actually have the audio version of it now too, so I'm with you on that.
Yeah, it's a great one.
That is a great one. As you've gotten older, what has become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question: what's become less important?
More important is I think I have more perspective on the gift of time, how important that is, and how, we don't get any more of it. And so when I think about impact and how I spend my time, I'm probably a lot more deliberate now than I was before. I don't take those precious moments for granted. Less important, having a clean house. rather be out doing something than cleaning, I take it. I'm busy and I have 2 sons, and it's just what really matters is difference, right? And so you just decide what you're going to make important and what isn't. So yeah, I'll let those things go a little bit.
There's a question that I didn't send you. When you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Oh, first person that comes to mind when you say the words, I'm sure a lot of people would pick a leader or something like that. I really think about my husband when I think about success. One, he's been really integral to my success, but also just how he has found his own place as part of a support network. We have a, kind of a non-traditional situation, and, he has found the things that are really important to him and focuses on them, and, has become, more of an artisan in his life versus being an engineer, and yet has been, sort of found his own success while at the same time making sure that I'm successful. So right off the cuff, that's what I would share.
I absolutely love the answer. It's one of my favorite questions. The reason I don't send it in advance is because we all define success differently, right? So it's to me it's a fun question. I will say this: husband, you're the first 40 some episodes in. Mom is the most popular answer, by the way. So I absolutely love it because it's very rare that people jump to like the business success or something like that, right? So I love that. That was beautiful. I thank you again, Steph, for being on the show. Last question I have for you. Is there anything else you would like to share, or final thoughts that you'd like to leave with the listeners?
Final thoughts. Go Astros.
That's this time of year. I am originally from Detroit, so you guys have Verlander. So by association, I'm rooting for you. So
good. Yeah, he's terrific. He's been a great add to the team. Helped him win the World Series 2 years ago, and we're hoping for a great run this year as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you again. We will link to everything we talked about in the show notes. If people have additional questions of you, is there a good way to reach you? LinkedIn, email? Do you have a preferred tool?
Yeah, LinkedIn or email.
Okay.
Those are the two that I'm most frequently available on. So I would say reach out.
Thank you again, Steph. Have an amazing day.
Thanks. You too.